Hello, hello, hello. We are live, and I just have to adjust a setting or two that I thought I had previously configured. Hold on one second. We'll be with you momentarily. I'm just waiting for a minute. I have, we'll just let a couple of people join if they're going to join. Interesting. My settings changed, and I can't, for the life of me, figure out how to get them back. Hang on. Well, all right. So we're going to get underway here. Thank you for joining. And I know my camera is not the one that I had intended to use, but yet the controls on this inaugural webcast are not allowing me to change it. I just haven't found it. Hold on one second. This may or may not work to my advantage. Okay, that didn't work either. So ransomware, why do you care? Ransomware is a ubiquitous problem for all businesses in the United States. And I can't even share my screen. Oh, here we go. Here we go. That isn't it. Bear with me, please. It's first time going through this one. And there. All right, so the sound should be better. Should definitely be better. And I have not, I intended to share a couple of slides and a couple of screens that I was supposed to be able to, and that is not apparently in my realm. All right, so ransomware, why do you care? Because it is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the cyber criminals are targeting small and medium-sized businesses. And if I could work out the file share, the screen share here, we would be okay. All right, so what happened to the screen share? So a company named Coveware does a lot of negotiation for companies or on behalf of companies with ransomware actors. And they put out some regular data that shows us that 75% of all attacks occur on companies that are less than $50 million in revenue and have fewer than 1,000 employees. So if your company falls into that realm or into that description, those categories, chances are they have their sights set on you. Now, why? Ransomware actors are opportunists, and they will go for the easiest target, the lowest hanging fruit. They know that companies that are moving past the $25 million a year range, they have 30, 40, 50 people. They may have a budget for an IT support person, but they don't have a budget for a cybersecurity focused person. And there's a bit of a push-pull. One, the realm of information technology is so vast, it's impossible for people to stay up on their sector, or everyone's got to specialize in their sector just to survive and do their job adequately and to excel in it. So when you're enabling services in IT, you're not necessarily figuring out how to do it securely at the same time. What program needs access to what API, what call has to be made to what server, what what has to happen in order for the user experience to be what was requested. So security comes along and says, you're using things that are just way out there and anyone can take advantage of them. So some security gets built in. And this is all in smaller companies. Larger companies, of course, have secure development teams. They have security specialists embedded with development teams. The AppSec DevOps, field is strong. But in the small, medium-sized business environment, we don't have that as a matter of course. So the cyber criminals know this. So they're looking for the easy, the easy pickings. And they'll go to companies, they'll scan, they'll do some reconnaissance, they'll do some research, they will test well-known vulnerabilities. They'll just say, hey, this company's on the internet. It has these things going on. And how does it respond when I send it this kind of traffic? If it does, I have a playbook of exploits I can use. And they exploit the weakness. They establish a foothold in one machine. That's all it takes. They establish a foothold, and then they start escalating their privileges and moving laterally. They start looking for your data. And for a period of time, getting access to your data so they could encrypt it was enough. You've heard a lot recently in the news about data being stolen and held for ransom. A lot of companies were catching on. They were not paying the ransomware actors, and now data is being used, and the threat of release of the data is being used as extra leverage against victim companies. And if you pay them, there's no guarantee that they actually destroy your data. There's no guarantee that they don't sell your data to the next opportunistic criminal for exploit. So where does that leave us? Or how do we know these things? There is a not-for-profit, non-governmental agency known as MITRE, M-I-T-R-E. And they have been assembling or amassing data, collecting data, and they have the advanced tools, techniques, and common knowledge or attack, the ATT ampersand CK. They have the attack matrix for enterprises, and they've put together a lot of data about well-known groups that are operating on the internet. And news reports always start talking about ransomware groups like sort of Beniki, this one, that one. And it really doesn't matter to the field of businesses that I'm really speaking to today, because more than likely there is no security program, and you're thinking about it. You know that you should, and you're wondering where to start. But the MITRE organization has put all this together, and they've observed, and this has been, this matrix has been built up through observation, and they've observed that some groups, and they know these groups by the tactics they use. We're creatures of habit. Humans are creatures of habit. Think about when you used to go to any public place like a church or a particular meeting. You park in the same general area. You go to work, you park in the same general area so that you can walk out the building and head in that area and find your car. We sit at usual tables in a cafeteria. We're creatures of habit, and we repeat things that we know work easily. So if a group that has built up the ability to hide a source of an email sends an email to somebody, they're more than likely, or they have skilled creative writers that get people to open infected emails. They'll lean on that. They're not going to go out and use email to exploit or to get into a company one week and then use a different well-known vulnerability the next week. They repeat the tactics. So the attack matrix identifies the techniques and gives some level of detail of how they're executed underneath. But the phases, that any attack goes through include, reconnaissance. How do they know that this law firm is an ideal target? Well, there was a headline: such and such law firm lands government contract and expands, 100%. Now making $100 million a year. There are stories in the business press that everyone can read. So targets identify themselves. While you're promoting your company to be desirable to potential clients and customers, you're also putting it out there that you are making more money. So there are a lot of ways that they do reconnaissance. There's no absolute rule. However, we have to be cognizant of what we're putting out there. So they know who we are. They know who the victim companies are. They do some reconnaissance, and then they test. Can you get the CEO's email address? There's going to be an administrator probably who opens all the emails first and forwards on the urgent ones. Can you get that person to open up an attachment? And when that attachment opens, malware is delivered to that workstation. If that workstation is configured in such a way that it's possible, they establish a foothold, they establish their own account, they create their own account, and then they look for domain controllers and other things in the network infrastructure that will allow them to move more freely. Then they look for the data. Once they locate the data, they download the malware and the keys that can encrypt it. So these phases are broken out in a little more detail by this MITRE attack matrix, which we've all paid for through our taxes. And it's really great. It's a great resource for identifying holes in a cybersecurity program or vulnerabilities that you can do something to patch up. But again, the ransomware modus operandi is find a foothold, make an initial compromise, exploit a weakness, exploit a vulnerability, establish a foothold. When the foothold is established, They spread laterally. They look for data. They look for critical information assets. And when that's found, they go back out to the internet, to the command and control network, which includes and is comprised of made up of servers all over the internet. They download the code and then encrypt your data. In the cases where they're stealing a lot of data, the data theft can be detected if you're watching for it. In the event or when they establish an account, if you have systems reporting when new accounts are established, you can alert yourself if, hey, wow, 2 accounts were created at 1 o'clock in the morning. Is that normal behavior in your network? And you can take an action against it or investigate. So, and I'm just kind of throwing a couple of things against the wall here to give you an idea of how we actually go about detecting an attack. Now, ransomware, I just wanted to say a couple more things. When you have your systems available or open to the internet, like we do to accommodate a lot of work from home situations, not only are you open and available to your employees, but you're open and available to cyber criminals. It's a thing. And there are a number of known vulnerabilities that are easy to break or easy to exploit. And one of them is called remote desktop protocol. And for the non-technical, the remote desktop protocol is a computer-to-computer language set of codes that allow, in this one, let's just say you're having problems with your machine. Somebody says, go to this site, and they take over the display and the keyboard from you to troubleshoot, right? So this enables and assists remote support. It's the remote desktop protocol, and it allows a remote person, a remote computer, to take over the functions of a different remote computer. So there's a vulnerability in this particular code, and it's been out there, it's been known for a while. And yet, as of Q3 2020, it is still one of the most widely used attack vectors known to the cybersecurity world. And if we know about it, why isn't it being fixed? And that's a great question. Let's look at the case where there's not a cybersecurity person on board, and we're heading into a lockdown, and the owner of the company says, make sure everyone can access their data from home. RDP is enabled. A scan across the address ranges of the internet have revealed that there are still, for the past year, there are still 250,000 workstations or systems on the internet that respond to an RDP question. Are you there? Yep. What? Who are you? With this RDP compromise, it is so severe that they just have to send a string of characters, a string of packets that are malformed in a particular way, and that allows them to get complete control over the destination system. It's a remote code execution vulnerability. It allows a remote person to execute code without any kind of identity check, no authorization, no check. You don't. So it breaks, the specially deformed string of characters breaks the receiver. So this, you would think, with the FBI has posted about it and urged people, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security agency, or CISA, Department of Homeland Security, has posted about it. It's been written up in trade magazines, but yet, you know, I would say probably a year ago, there were 800,000 RDP listeners on the internet. Today, it's down to 250,000. Now, there are a lot of things that can actually steer, you know, make it more difficult to change. Among them might be legacy applications. You know, companies that go out of business that had an application that allowed you to control this, that, or the other thing, they're not supported. They only work in a particular fashion. And I'm going to give an example that I heard secondhand, and it was that there was a Windows 97 computer discovered at a government laboratory. And the security researchers and investigators said, we got to get rid of this. And it turns out that it was the only control system for a $5 million electron microscope. Company that made that software interface no longer exists. It still works and does exactly what it's supposed to control the electron microscope, but upgrading that one particular system is going to cost the whole cost of a new electron microscope, which could be $5 to $10, $15 million. So that's not going to get upgraded. So working with the IT folks, security professionals have to come up with a way to protect legacy systems and detect malware in legacy systems, and in order to serve the organization appropriately. You know, there are things that arise, legacy apps, things that they're old systems, and anyone that visits state of Connecticut website, Department of Labor, it is not a very well organized system, but they made it work in the time frames that they had. And right now they're in a it works, don't touch it mode. So usability becomes well, I don't know that it's anything anyone wants to keep, but availability is what is the target there. Data is available to the people that need it. So there are vulnerabilities. And in the realm of ransomware, an easily exploited vulnerability leads to this foothold. Now, if you imagine a criminal operator from Eastern Europe, for example, establishing an account on a workstation in your environment, they're going to be downloading code. Now, how do they find the code that they have to download to encrypt your data? And by the way, I just realized I may not have formally outlined ransomware. Ransomware is encrypting your data in place so that you can't access it. A foreign entity comes into your network, finds your data, and encrypts it, taking it out of your hands, because encryption algorithms are impossible to break. And I should have probably said that a long time ago. I apologize. But the encrypting of data, when your data is encrypted, the ransomware operator demands a payment in Bitcoin. And if you pay, and if they do what they say they're going to do, they give you the key and a utility little piece of code that you use to decrypt your data and get it back. And there are no guarantees that the code's written well, or no guarantees that it all works. Early in the days of ransomware, some operators just extorted money under the promise of getting a key, and it was never supplied. Now, the ransomware gangs figured out that was bad for business, because no one's going to pay if nothing's going to happen. So they began returning are actually providing the keys, and people would get their data back, and it became a business decision. Is it worth our time? Is it worth our money to do this? And now limits are being pushed, and they're criminals. They don't care if you get your data back. They want to get your money. If you get your data back, great. If not, they don't care. But they're also leveraging, they're stealing the data. And it was the point I was getting to. When a ransomware operator infiltrates your network, they're looking for the data, and with the right privileges, they can encrypt all of it. And since companies have been making steps to make that more difficult and not pay, or enable themselves to recover without paying, they've stolen data, exfiltrated data out, and use that as leverage. And it's a powerful force. There was an IT services company that defiantly said, we're not paying. And the next thing they learned was that they had their data, and they paid anyway. And when you lose access to your data, aside from paying a ransomware operator, how can you get it back? Well, if you have backups, if your backup system is good and robust, you can restore your data from offsite storage. The thing about ransomware operators is that they know backup data exists. They've taken to looking for backups and deleting them. If you have a cloud-based service that connects only when you're doing a backup, disconnects, and is offline, your data is safer because it's not a mounted volume. It does not appear to be a disk in your environment that's holding all of your backup data. So it's out of their reach. They encrypt your data. You might be able to restore all your data fairly quickly. And this is one of the big tips along the lines of what can you do to prevent or to mitigate the impact of a ransomware attack on your company. Make sure you have good backups. Number one, make sure you have good backups. Backups can be made system server to server. You can have a backup server that takes all your data and then stores it on non-removable or removable media, stores it on portable media, on tape, disk, or another system. Can you restore your data as fast as you can archive it? That's a big question. If you think that you can restore your data in 2 or 3 days, and you've calculated the cost of being down and unavailable to your customers, except for the old pencil and paper processes, if you've calculated that and said we can be down for 3 days, but yet it takes 7 days to do a full restore on all of your data, what is the financial impact going to be? And it's worth going to your IT supplier, your outsourcer, your partner, and asking, how fast would it take to do a full restore of the environment? It would also help to test that, because things like I'm learning today in this inaugural webcast, things happen when you try to do them for the first time. And in case you didn't know, I'm streaming on Facebook and hopefully YouTube, the McLean Cybersecurity channel. So what happens, one, have good backups, test them, and test them. So there's the how long would it take to recover test, and there's the test that also make sure that your backups are compatible. There was going to be another point. Oh, I forgot that. But you got to test. Oh, yes. You can test backups to make sure that you can restore, individual files. You don't have to do a full offline restore. Make sure that your backup system works as you intend it to. That is critical. So that's one step. And I jumped into that because there's still a lot of vulnerable systems out there. And new vulnerabilities arrive constantly. When an attacker is navigating through your network, they have to find, like I said, their servers out on the internet that have the malicious code, the malware. So how do they find those servers? They actually use the domain name system that every system on the computer, every system on the internet uses. And the domain name system is the system that translates an English language URL like cisco.com or webtitan.com. It decodes that or resolves that URL into an IP address, Internet Protocol address. And there are some registrars out there that don't have the best standards, and they'll allow somebody to register ZXY2 for &78.com as a valid URL. And random strings for domain names like that are all, and it could be anything. It could be a misspelled domain. It could be evil.com or soevil.com. It doesn't really matter because they'll just cycle through them. But they need these when your system, your compromised system, or the compromised system in your network tries to go to one of these servers, it goes to that workstation's DNS resolving server. It goes to the DNS server and says, get me the IP address for evil.com because I have to get there to download code. And your DNS servers don't know where evil.com is, so they look upstream. And this is how DNS is supposed to work. And they look upstream. They're given, there are a couple of different ways that they identify the actual server that has the domain name, evil.com, and the IP address. They get the IP address, and then they go to the IP address for evil.com, and they download the malware. You can interrupt this tactic, or you can interrupt this process by subscribing to an external DNS service that is coupled with threat intelligence that will not return a result to your inquiring workstation if in fact the final destination is blacklisted, is known to host malware, doesn't have the appropriate reputation, etc. So there's a level of protection just to resolve, in the resolution of bad domains to IP addresses. And that's great. Is that all you need to do? Well, no, because it's not going to take much for an attacker to realize that the final DNS resolution is not happening. And since they have control over your machine, they can manually set DNS servers that are in their office or anywhere. And, they could set it to Google's 8.8.8.8. There's not a lot of inspection or investigation. Google looks to resolve these things quickly and get on with it. But you want that filtered source to be the only external DNS resolution. So you have to have your service provider configure your firewalls to not allow any kind of name resolution traffic, DNS traffic, to go anywhere but the filtering service, the filtering DNS service that you subscribe to. And that will add a layer of difficulty onto what they're trying to do. Is that perfect? No, no, but it's a step in the right direction. The elixir. So ransomware depends on, to kind of recap, depends on the ability of a ransomware operator to exploit a weakness, exploit a vulnerability, and move laterally, download their malware to all of the affected machines, and then encrypt all of the data on those machines. We looked at vulnerabilities. There are open vulnerabilities. The remote desktop protocol has been patched, but the patches have not been applied in quite a number of cases. We have phishing emails where, we used to laugh at the emails from the, supposed Nigerian prince, just send me $10 and I'll send you a $20 million inheritance that you're due. Those kinds of things. They're much more sophisticated now. And they often come, these kinds of phony emails come that look exactly like, a PayPal correspondence, an American Express receipt, an Amazon receipt. They are made to look like valid traffic, and the entire goal is to get somebody to click on it, and it bypasses all the intelligence systems at the edge of the network and downloads code that establishes the foothold on that one machine. And can that be stopped? Well, yes. Email systems can be set up such that they filter off attachments. They filter out links. Perhaps not perfect, but they do. There are some general assumptions that are made. A lot of companies have gone to Office 365 in the cloud. They have very good email filters, but Microsoft is not well known for being agile and flexible and rapid in their response to some things. So it might take them a little longer to discover a vulnerability in their system. There are companies out there that focus completely on email. Proofpoint, for example, is one of them. They can take your attachments and they can render them in a hardened viewer so that executable code never makes it to your email server or to your workstation in your network. You're reading it like it's a static web page. So there are technologies out there that can help reduce the threat or reduce the risk and exposure to malicious email. And that's great. So you have filtered DNS, we have email filtering and email configuration. These are a couple of straightforward steps to take to mitigate the impact of a malware attack. The RDP compromise let's see, in companies that were, and I'm looking from Coveware, and I would share this if I could, but I can't, and it's aggravating. But where are we? Here we go. In companies of up to 100 people, over or about 70% of ransomware attacks were executed through the RDP compromise. As you get to the 1,000 user threshold, 1,000 to 10,000 employees, then the RDP compromise only accounted for 40% of all successful ransomware incidents. So the low-hanging fruit facing the network and the attacker's ability to exploit that, it's just easy for them. They're opportunistic. They're going to go for it. And if you consider all of the big companies that have made headlines through cybersecurity incidents, like Garmin, for example, they were held up for $10 million, I think was the original ransom demand. It's a big company. They're leading the market in fitness trackers and the like. They make up a very, over 1,000 employees or 10,000 employees. They're well funded, and they have cybersecurity teams that are still getting hacked. So no one should be embarrassed about being a victim of a cybersecurity attack, because the biggest and most well-known brands are still getting attacked successfully on grand scales. So now they're getting attacked. What can we do to protect the small and medium-sized business? Going back to making sure that all systems facing the internet are patched, making sure that we're doing as much as we can to protect from internet originating traffic making it through into our network. Now, if in fact a vulnerability is exploited, we have that detection ability. Is someone trying to go out to some weird domain in the middle of the night? And we can do that through the configuration of our firewalls and some system logging, syslogging, and looking, our equipment, all of our networking equipment likes to tell us what's going on if we configure it to do so. So we can detect when odd patterns, odd indicators of compromise are triggered from inside trying to go out. And most people think of cybersecurity and defense, or cybersecurity, from a purely protective, defense-oriented perspective. Keep the bad actors out. It's impossible. 100% security is not possible. I mean, think about Windows 10. It is what, 53 gigabytes? Yeah, it's huge. It's been developed for years by thousands of software engineers and computer scientists. Some writing with one style, some writing with another style. Billions and billions of lines of code written by thousands of people over time. There are bound to be things that cause weaknesses. There are bound to be bugs. And it's incumbent upon everyone to alert the proper authorities when they're found. But we're not in a bug-free world. So compromises will happen. An attacker will get into your network. Can they escalate? Can they configure the machine that they broke into or established their foothold on? Can they create a privileged user account. In the world of Windows, we have standard users and privileged users. And the privileged users can do anything they want. They can establish new accounts, they can download code, they can run code, and that's a problem. Standard users can't. But when you have a standard user who's going to download, I don't know, something like Restream software, or a Restream agent to run on a laptop so that I can broadcast to the world. Without administrator privileges, with standard user privileges, you have to have the IT team involved to authorize, through an authorized administrator account, the running of this software. You have, in order to copy it and in order to get it installed on a machine, you need privileged access. So if you have 100, 200, 300 employees, and everyone's got a laptop, everyone's got a workstation, and they're trying to do their jobs, they've come up with things, they trial software for designing mechanical parts. They want a 30-day free trial before they recommend that you purchase or spend several $1,000s on this software for the whole design team. So every time somebody or a new user wants to do that trial, IT has to get involved to one, install or allow the installation of the software to go, and it's just very touch point intensive. There are a lot of touch points. IT has to be involved, or users can be forced to enter the administrative privilege password so that they can install software. And controlling those passwords is an issue, but users don't want to have to constantly put in another password, authorize and authenticate themselves, and get authorized access. They don't want to have to do that all the time. But establishing or deploying all of your systems in standard user mode decreases the risk that any code can execute on any malware can execute on your machine, but it has this other support requirement that can get in the way of users enjoying their jobs. But that is a way to stifle the attack. And with the ability to run code removed, you're pretty well off. However, there are other avenues. If you are a smaller company, you have an IT service provider, they can get attacked, and the attacker can ride in to your environment on their connection to you. And their connection is going to be privileged because they're remotely accessing workstations on your network to do IT administration. So the difficulty is understanding and wrapping your mind around the fact that you cannot build a secure enough perimeter to keep the bad actors out. You have to assume that you're going to get compromised. And when you assume you're going to get compromised, you can start looking for the indicators of compromise. What is a threat actor going to be doing in my network? Well, they're going to be trying to connect to those weird domains, right? So we implement that filtered DNS service. We lock down our outbound traffic or our outbound DNS traffic to only go to those 2 IP addresses. And we can, every morning, look at a report. Can you have a system? Do you have a system? A security incident and event management system, or a syslog server. Someone can write a script. If you have a talented programmer on staff, they can write a script. All of the denials for DNS traffic overnight. Identify those indicators of compromise and then investigate the origin of those packets. Excuse me. And that takes some process. It takes time, energy, and effort, and manpower. And it takes the routine. Excuse me. So a lot goes into the cybersecurity stance. So I've been talking for about 50 minutes, and I don't see any questions. Let me check Facebook. Do I have anything here? I don't know if I have any, I can't tell. And I'm really trying to troubleshoot this. Pardon me. I'm going to have to do it again. And I'm going to have to research a little more, because I really thought that this software was going to allow me to share my screen. I only had, oh, look at that. That might do it. Let's see what happens. You know, it's something I did not see before. All right, let's look at this. Hey, here we go. The MITRE attack matrix for enterprise. These are along the top. These are the steps that are involved in a ransomware or an attack compromise. You have reconnaissance, you have resource development, initial access. Like I said, this is where the foothold is established on one machine. Persistence is where the ability to come back, this is really the foothold, the ability to keep coming back. The privilege escalation, if they find the weakness and they can continually wind up at the same system, if they find that bug that doesn't require authentication, they establish that, they figure out where they are. These are some of the techniques they use to establish persistence, right? And these are all things that have been done throughout time. A lot of data has been assembled. We have the privilege escalation, defense evasion. If I talked about being able to get a syslog message when a traffic rule in a firewall is violated or matched. It says if, permit this, permit DNS traffic to go to this Web Titan server and log all failed attempts. You can do that in a firewall. So traffic going outbound, you can generate these syslog messages. If they were skilled in the configuration of the router or the syslog server, they could get in and delete those indicators of compromise. Credential access, discovery, lateral movement. This is all, discovery, the movement through the enterprise so that they can get their command and control servers to download, give the command and control servers access to download the code. Exfiltration and impact. Impact is the encryption. So now I've been talking to 55 minutes. I've just discovered that, in fact, that was the way to share my screen. It looked like an option that was unavailable. It didn't look like a toggle on or off. It looked like an option that was unavailable. So I want to thank anyone who came in. I see I got one person watching besides my other, well, no, it's actually Facebook and my McLean Cybersecurity YouTube channel. Thank you. I'm going to jump at this point and shut this down. And I want to hopefully get some feedback. I didn't intend to actually go all through it, and glad I did. I'm going to do this again and more often and hone the message and the lessons. By all means, send me an email, bob@mcleancybersecurity.com with a hyphen in there. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.